Money Show.
Welcome to The Money Show. I'm Bruce Whitfield. Well, it's a great pleasure to welcome Ivor Blumenthal into the studio this evening. Author of 50 Shades of Greed, the Services SETA, Warts and all. He was chief executive of the Services SETA all the way from 2000, I think it was, Ivor.
Good evening, Bruce, and thanks for having me. Yes, I was the first CEO of the Services SETA, and it was a decade service.
Explain the SETA environment to us, the great unwashed, who don't fully understand what goes on in this underworld of training and education.
I have to say something, and that is that you've really only got yourself to blame if it's still the great unwashed, given that this is an organ of state that's been around for close to 15 years, Bruce.
Yeah,
and everyone's engaged on it. Everyone's had their say about what SETAs should look like. It's been through a whole series of reformations over a 15-year period. And what SETAs essentially are they're the conduit of skills levy funding back into industry. The money comes from business, and then it's poured back into business, or a percentage of it is poured back into business for the development of existing labor pools. In other words, people who already work in those businesses, as well as future potential labor pools. In other words, unemployed people, the youth, etc., on youth development programs.
From your perspective, how effective has the SETA system been?
Well, that's the irony. The world looks at South Africa and lauds this absolute phenomenon that we created over that 15-year period. And yet in South Africa, there seems to be a dearth of that kind of compliment and really just criticism left, right and center. In reality, I think it's been absolutely phenomenal in every sector served by SETAs. Remember that there are over 20 SETAs in this country because there are over 20 sectors of business clusters in this country.
Absolutely right. I mean, this was the brainchild of Membatisi Mdladlana. He was the Labour Minister.
No, this was the brainchild of Tito Mboweni.
Was it Tito Mboweni?
Absolutely.
Mdladlana was the minister at the time it was implemented.
Mdladlana took over from Minister Mboweni.
Yeah.
But really, this was ushered in by Tito Mboweni.
Okay, so this was his brainchild, executed then by Membatisi Mdladlana in the year 2000. You started at the Services SETA, and it all seemed to be going rather swimmingly, but it all went quite badly pear-shaped.
You know, I started around 1998 as chairperson of the Services SETA, and thereafter became the first CEO of the organization once all the SETAs were promulgated into being. And yeah, we grew it from an organization which started off with 250 million rand income to over R1 billion a year income, and that's just one of the SETAs. Yeah, it didn't go pear-shaped. What happened is a new regime, a new series of priorities came into being, and as such, change was necessary. There's no question that transformation was necessary, particularly in an organization such as ours, which really didn't have a history of bargaining councils, of trade union movements, etc. It was really left to its own devices because, as I say in my book, I call it the rubbish bin SETA, and that's precisely what it was. It was a sector that really had been relegated to the rubbish bin. So every time you found an industry that couldn't fit into a traditionally defined sector, you'd throw it back into the services sector. And so we found ourselves with about 35 industries, which eventually became the strongest cluster of industries and skills development in this country.
But you and Blade Nzimande, because eventually you ended up reporting into Blade Nzimande at some point, didn't you? And you seem to be fighting before you even met.
I've never met the guy on a one-to-one basis. I only met him when he addressed SETAs collectively. But in reality, look, the reason that the Services SETA took Minister Nzimande to court on numerous occasions is because we took issue with how he wanted to take over and change the constitutions of the SETAs unilaterally, and quite frankly kick out the leadership of SETAs and put his own guys in. And that's really what the fight was about. But in reality, I never met the guy in my life.
Okay, so you had a big fight without ever meeting.
Six fights.
Six massive fights. What was it that went wrong? What was it that you objected to so strongly that Blade Nzimande was proposing
as
to do
I
in the
said,
Services?
to change the constitution of SETAs unilaterally, to kick out the leadership structures of those SETAs, to basically relegate business representatives to a secondary position in SETAs, to take away the representatives of the business community and put neutral people in who, quite frankly, had nothing to do with SETAs because of a perception of bias and nepotism, which, in fact, the courts found was completely illegal.
Yeah, because the issues revolve around money. They revolve around government collecting lots of money and distributing that money. This seems like it has become a honeypot around which lots of bees were congregating at some point.
It's a big honeypot. I mean, you're talking about over 7 billion rand collectively a year. You're talking about the priorities now set centrally by government, whereas historically they were set in a very democratic, collective kind of fashion, where the social partners actually set those priorities. These priorities are now set by government, and they really are about only financially feeding the projects of government and therefore political projects.
And the government's got an ambition. It's got a stated mission of creating millions of jobs, and the posts are moved from time to time. It's government saying we can do this better than the social partners can.
Yeah.
Your argument very strongly is, hold on a second, guys, you can't. And it's not working as well as it was.
The argument is really there's no need to interfere when something's working. Tell us what you want to get out of it, and we will make sure as social partners that we deliver on what it is you want. I mean, remember Tisi Matadlana understood that process. That's why he said, I want 10,000 domestic workers trained. And we trained 10,000 domestic workers around the country, gave them qualifications. We trained over 8,000 estate agents in the country because the minister in charge of the real estate sector said, only people who've got qualifications will qualify to be licensed in the sector. So those priorities were set by cabinet ministers, and we delivered on those priorities. The deputy minister under Thabo Mbeki's government said, we need more apprentices in the country. The services SETA turned around and said, well, we've never trained apprentices before, but because it's your priority, we'll take it on. And over a 3-4 year period, the services SETA became #1 feeder of apprentices in South Africa. So we were responsive to government organizations in terms of government priorities, but not to be run by government, to be run by the people who paid the skills levy, i.e. business and organized business in particular, and to a lesser extent to be run by those bumbling trade unionists out there.
Bumbling trade unions. I mean, it is all about the breakdown of trust between government, unions and business. There is very little trust across those sectors between government and unions. Now, unions and business, government and business, and the three together is a cocktail for massive conflict.
Well, Bruce, let's be honest. Now there is no three. Now there are tripartite deployees into leadership structures of business. There are tripartite deployees into the leadership structures of trade union movements, and then there are political deployees into government departments. So it is no longer a tripartite relationship and therefore a true social partnership. It is now one of those three organizations running all three of those organizations.
And that is, I suppose, where the real concern comes, because you talk about greed, 50 shades of greed. Where does this greed rear its ugly head?
Look, the greed has got nothing to do with the Department of Higher Education and Training, and that's what this book says. This book says, forget about that. That was strategy. I understand the strategy of the minister and of the South African Communist Party, etc. I understand why they needed the money, and that was good strategy on their behalf. What this book talks about is the fact that within the business community and the labor community, there is inactivity. There is misdirection because of greed. These guys could have done so much more for this country that they haven't yet done. The organized business community is a laughing joke in this country. As you know, the organized labor community is a laughing joke in this country, and I was very pleased to hear you talking to Vic a little earlier, because before his days at the ILO, Vic was very active in the world of NEDLAC and trying to get the social partnership thing working, but in reality it's not working in this country.
And why is it not working?
Well, it's not working for the same reason I spoke about a little earlier. There is not a true organized business identity in this country which is independent of the tripartite alliance, which is independent of the ANC, COSATU, or the SACP. And in fact, there is not a neutral trade union movement in this country either. So you can't talk about a true social partnership because it doesn't exist.
And is that deliberate? Is it accidental? Is it evolutionary in the environment in which we've sort of all grown up?
No, it's absolutely deliberate. It's about how you make how you engineer transformation in South Africa. You have to take over that social partnership. You have to dominate and control it. It's fantastic, fantastic strategy. And it's working for them, but it's not working for the country. And it's not working for the business community or, in fact, even the labor community.
If you were to apportion blame across the three sectors, how would you go about it? 60, 20, 20, or how would you break it up?
Blame, I would say, I would apportion at least 40% of the blame to business and another 40% to labor and the balance to government. And when I say business, what am I saying? And I talk as an ex-representative of the business community, so I can talk from within. What I am saying is this: they've not done enough to lead skills transformation in this country. They've not done enough to govern the affairs of SETAs effectively. Yes, we did set some kind of a scenario for social partnership in the service of SETA, but that in fact is why I think it was closed down in the first place. Our chairperson was removed. At the time, the person who was nominated by the minister to take over from the chairperson role at the service of SETA, where we rotated it between business and labor every couple of years, the person who was nominated to take over was in fact Gwede Mantashe's wife.
Oh, okay.
And that's just one SETA, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, where does this leave the education and training of people who so desperately need it?
Well, I think the problem is with the education system. Because the throughput of people from the schools is a laughing joke in this country, business have to spend skills money on, in fact, re-educating rather than skills development. And that's the biggest problem we've got in this country. It's not a problem which has disappeared. It hasn't gone away. I was interested to hear your interview a little earlier about science and technology in the schools and at university level, etc.
Yeah.
That's not true. The bottom line is we're going backwards when it comes to math, science and technology in the country, not forward. And so what do you do if you're in the world of work? You inherit what is effectively a spoiled generation upon generation upon generation of matriculants. How do you convert those individuals into skilled people in the workforce? It's very difficult. I'll give you a practical example. 45,000 people enrolling every year in the service of SETA programs, roughly about 16,000 of those people graduating, and the balance having to be exited on what we call skills programs because they don't have the fundamentals of literacy, of numeracy, of life skills in place. And that I blame on the schools. We've got the best raw material in the world. And I'm saying that having participated in a number of bodies. So I'm saying that from a point of insight. We've got the best raw material in the world, and it gets absolutely screwed up by our education system year after year after year. And they're lied to by that education system, and more importantly, we, or rather the workplace, is lied to about the quality of people coming out of the schools. That's the problem we've got in South Africa.
What are you hoping this book's going to achieve, Ivor?
Well, this book is a case study. I'm hoping that this book will right the nonsense that's been sprouted about how bad SETAs have been over the last 10 years. Because we all know what's coming. Whether it's the ANC or whether it's the DA, someone is going to say close the SETAs down, and the legacy of what SETAs have accomplished is in fact going to be lost. And that's why I wrote this book, to record that legacy as a case study for most probably the only set of parastatals that work properly in South Africa.
You admit in the book to being bitter, to being cross, to being absolutely frustrated and furious, and it comes through, I think, very strongly. Is your book, is it a reliable account? It's not too personal, not too close to what you've experienced?
No, the book's not a reliable account. It's my account. It's my account as a CEO of an organization of a 10-year period. It's my account as a member of the National Skills Authority prior to that, who wrote the legislation about what SETAs should do and what they should accomplish. So it's an absolutely biased account of Ivor Blumenthal, a CEO of the service of SETA, given my insight. And that's it.
Well, that's often the most powerful position, of course, is the personal position. 50 Shades of Greed, the Services SETA story. Ivor Blumenthal, the Chief Executive, impassioned former Chief Executive of the Services SETA. Thank you for sharing an insight into the book. It's available in bookshops, like all the books we review here on The Money Show.